And if you'd like to get started here, just to let us know that you're here, into the chat box, if you would like to type in the city and or state that you are watching this from, that would be great. That gives us just a little bit of an idea of where everybody is coming from, how large of a group it is. And we will be happy to share some of those. Oh, great. Tustin, Fallbrook, Laguna Beach, Chula Vista, Cameron Park, Santa Cruz, Ukiah, Michigan. Wonderful. Thanks to everybody for sharing all of those information. Continue sharing those, and if you recognize anybody that you see from your local area, be sure to give them a shout out and say hello. But I'd like to go ahead and, as you're continuing to type in those, I'd like to go ahead and open us with a word of prayer, if you would join me. Father God, we just thank you so much for today. Thank you for these great panelists that are with us. Thank you for our friends at the National March for Life, Tom McCluskey, Margaret Youngblood, and Mackenzie Rogers. Thank you for their leadership and their service. Thank you for their boss, Jeannie Mancini, and the great leadership she and that entire team have provided in our nation's capital. It was such an honor and a privilege to be with them in Washington, D.C. earlier this year, where for the first time in history, a sitting president of the United States came and addressed the crowd in person. And we just thank you that even though we live in tumultuous political times, we thank you that there are still leaders of all parties, of all backgrounds, of all faiths, and no matter what their persuasion in many other areas, there's lots of leaders that we have that want to defend the sanctity of human life. So we thank you for that. We pray that you would use this webinar today as we hear from these panelists. Give us wisdom as to how best be effective advocates to advance the cause of life in Sacramento, in Washington, D.C., and in our daily lives. We ask all of this in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Again, thank you all for being here. If you're just joining us, we're up to, it looks like 152 participants, and we expect more people to join over the course of the webinar. One thing that we did ask, if you're joining just right now, if you'd like to share the city that you are calling from or that you are joining from. Wow, this is great. Newfoundland and Labrador, Canada, Rancho Cucamonga, California, Sacramento, San Jose, Santa Ana. Really wonderful to have so many of you from all across the great state of California joining us today. Well, the main purpose of today's webinar, as we said in the title, is Sacramento 101. Even in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic, the legislature is back at work. And even when they were not physically inside the Capitol building, they were continuing to work to advance legislation, meeting remotely, similar to how we are right now. And many of you, I guess I could say this is another good question that I could ask you to share into the chat box. You could share with me how many of you have ever been to the Capitol physically to lobby in favor or in opposition of a particular bill. You could just say once, twice, multiple times, never, whatever you want to put in there. But if you've been to the Capitol, just tell me how many times you have been there to lobby for a bill. Good, multiple times. Some people never, some people once, never, never. Okay, this is good. This is a great mix. This is exactly what we want, because the information on this webinar, we're hoping is going to be enough. It's going to be basic enough that anybody can use it if you've never been to the Capitol. But even if you're a seasoned veteran, someone that has grown old in the service of your country, to paraphrase George Washington, we still hope that there'll be some great information here for you. But to start that off, I wanted to allow one of our panelists named Bernadette Tacey to share with you how she went from being where many of you are right now, someone who had never been to the Capitol, someone who had never engaged in lobbying, but did have a deep pro-life conviction, how God used her and how she moved from being an advocate who was living it in her own life to someone who is now a leader in the pro-life movement with Fresno Pro-Life Future, and also doing legislative advocacy. So Bernadette Tacey, I'm gonna turn the floor over to you. I know you have a short presentation for us, and welcome Thanks for being with us today.
Thanks so much for having me, Jonathan. Yes, I am going to share my screen so that you all can view what I'm looking at. I'm going to be talking a little bit about grassroots activism and how we can counter the industry's attempt to increase abortion numbers in our community, in our states. And there are a lot of different ways that people do this in the pro-choice movement and the pro-abortion movement, but I'm going to be talking about a couple of ways specifically, and that is through censorship, specifically on college campuses, and also through pro-life advocacy in the Capitol fighting pro-abortion legislation. So, are you able to see this screen? Yes, okay, good. All right, so I do have a personal experience with issues with free speech
Bernadette,
on college campuses.
Can you go ahead and
yes.
start, push the slideshow start button on the top left that says from beginning?
Yes, yes. That would help. There we go.
There we go.
That's even better. All right, so a few years ago, back in May 2017, I acquired permission from Fresno State University, which is the school that I attended, to chalk positive pro-life messages on the sidewalks outside the university. And what we did is we did just that. We chalked all of these pro-life messages. You can see one of the examples right here on the screen. And as we finished up that day, a professor came up to me and said that he would be returning to erase those messages. And he ended up recruiting students to help him erase those messages. And when I asked him why, he said that it was his free speech to censor our messages. Now, you and I know that free speech is not, censorship is not part of free speech, but this is what is being taught on college campuses by these professors. And our students are our future leaders, even our future professors, and for other future college students. But we ended up filing a lawsuit against him with the help of Alliance Defending Freedom. And of course, we won this lawsuit, which was a big, big win for the free speech movement, but also for the pro-life movement. And this is actually something that really, really motivated us to get back out on campus and to share the pro-life message. And one thing I didn't mention is that this was happening in our first year of activity as a Students for Life group on campus. We struggled with low membership. We only had about 2 or 3 members, and we've had several flyers torn down and defaced. And so you're thinking at the end of this year, we're feeling pretty defeated, which we were. And so this actually helped us to be motivated to get back out on campus and to share that message. And if you're interested in viewing the video that I took during this incident, there's a screenshot on top, and there's the title of the video for YouTube right down on the bottom of the screen. And Alliance Defending Freedom actually also recently came out with an animated short, and so you're welcome to look that up on YouTube as well. Now, another thing that has motivated us, another thing that we've been facing recently, is the California Campus Abortion Bill. Now, these are 2 things that are very much adverse, of course, to us in the pro-life movement, but they're things that have motivated our group specifically to get out and to make sure that our voice is heard. California's SB 24 Campus Abortion Bill requires all 34 public universities to distribute RU46 abortion pills on campus through their student health centers. Now, this bill was originally vetoed by Governor Jerry Brown, pro-choice Governor Jerry Brown, but it came back and it has since been signed into law by Governor Gavin Newsom. Now, we had to learn a lot about this bill. Like Jonathan mentioned, I was somebody who had never even read a bill in my entire life, and none of my group had either. We had never lobbied up in the Capitol, and we had no political advocacy experience. But this bill was so motivating for us because it was very close to home. This was going to be happening on our college campuses with our friends, and this is something that we wanted to do something about. And I have some talking points here about why this bill is so bad. I'm not going to go over all the talking points. I want to focus on the lobbying and what we were doing about it. But you can see in this picture here, we rallied students. Students for Life of America helped to rally students all the way across California. And we had a rally in front of the building, in front of the Capitol building. We have students all the way from San Diego that came all the way up to Sacramento. So you can see how dedicated our students were in fighting against this bill. And of course, we took a lot of action throughout it was about 2.5 years where this bill was active between the original bill, SB 320, and the most recent bill, SB 24. And if you look at the bottom right picture here, this is actually a picture of us in an office visit on our very first lobbying day, where we were talking with legislative staff members about this bill and about our concerns. And what happens is a lot of times the legislative staffers will take this into account when they're thinking about maybe some questions that they might ask on the floor. So this particular office is actually a Republican pro-life office. And so he, being that he was pro-life, he was very friendly towards us as far as our viewpoints. And so we were able to give him some information so that we could give him the ammo to be able to ask the right questions on the hearing floor so that he could further publicize our viewpoints using his position. And of course, we visited several other pro-choice offices as well. And we remember that every time that we're talking with somebody in an office, we make sure that they are hearing our message. So it doesn't matter if we're talking with a legislative official, a legislative staffer, or even an intern. Anytime we're talking with somebody in that office, we know that we are presenting the pro-life message, and we want to be able to present that well and communicate our pro-life efforts well with them. Now, we also did several other things like hosting displays on college campuses in the community. We gathered petitions, we wrote our own petitions. We met with our college administrators. And so we used that information that we learned through our lobby days and our efforts to take that information back to our own college administrations and share the information with them as well. And one thing I forgot to mention is that in the very beginning of this, we had a 3-day training with Students for Life of America and California Family Council and Californians for Life, where they actually showed us the ropes. They told us how to go about this, fighting this pro-abortion legislation and making sure that our voice is heard, not only in the Capitol, but in our community and on our campuses. And we did several lobby days, and we're 3 hours away from Sacramento, and we ended up lobbying 7 or 8 times. So, and that's 3 hours one way. So you can see how dedicated we were to making sure that our voice was heard in the Capitol and of course on our campus and community. We also testified during the hearings. You'll see on the top picture right here. This is what it looks like during one of the hearings. We have people lining up and saying who they are, where they're from, and that they're for or against a certain bill. And this is our Fresno Pro-Life Future member test right here. We also built relationships with legislators, of course the pro-life legislators as well, making sure that they know that we are supporting them as well. And we spoke with the media to make sure that we were in control of the narrative. We wrote opinion pieces and blogs, and Students for Life of America also created the NoCampusAbortions.com resource center so that anybody could be involved, anybody could sign a petition, anybody could learn about the bill and take that information and talk with their friends and family members. And one thing I want to make sure that I stress is that even though a bill is vetoed or signed into law, the action doesn't stop then. So after this was signed into law last October, we made sure that we continue to educate online about RU486 and the abortion pill itself. We are planning on sidewalk counseling in front of these abortion facilities on our campuses once they do open up in a couple of years when they're required to start their programs. We are applying bill-specific efforts to other states and letting other pro-life activists know what we did and what we learned about our fight against this specific bill, because this bill has already been introduced in other states. And we know that California likes to start trends like this in the abortion industry. And of course, we're always recruiting pro-life activists. So remember that anytime that you are in the Capitol, in your campus, in your community, making sure that you're spreading that pro-life message, it's so important that we are involved in all 3 different areas to make sure that our voice is heard.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Bernadette. And I want to let everybody know, if you'd like to go to the Q&A box, if you have a question for Bernadette, you can post the question there and we will take time to answer that a little bit later. And I also want to let you know, in the end of the call, towards the very end, we're going to be sharing several links, both in the chat and then also in a follow-up email that will have all of the things that Bernadette mentioned regarding that video of her confronting Professor Thatcher on the Fresno State campus. It'll have some more information from Alliance Defending Freedom about the legal results of that case. And for me, it's just such a great reminder for how the smallest actions, at the time, Bernadette, I don't want to make her blush too much, but it would have been very easy as a college student just to see a professor, someone in authority, doing something that was clearly unconstitutional, but just say, look, I've got to get to class, I've got to go and run and do this other thing. I don't have time to deal with this right now. I guess that's just the way the world works. But instead, she pulled out her cell phone, she recorded the interaction, and it led to not only her club winning that day, but free speech winning. And it was a precedent that is now set for all future pro-life activists in Fresno and around the state of California. So it's a huge blessing. And I see a couple people real quick here on questions. Will this video be available recorded to watch after the fact? I'd love my senior in high school to watch this, but she's defending her thesis today. Yes, I believe we are working to have this video edited down in a watchable form. You obviously won't be able to ask questions afterwards, but we will be able to share this afterwards. I'm going to call a little bit of an audible here. I just want to ask Tom McCluskey. Tom, I know we have our schedule. Would you like, I see that we have Assemblyman Jim Patterson with us right now. So I want to go ahead and be respectful of his time. He's been able to join us from the office there. It looks like, Assemblyman Patterson, you're in Sacramento, am I correct? Or is this in Fresno?
Yeah, we're just unmuting.
Oh, no problem.
Can you hear me all right?
We can, yes.
Good. I'm in Sacramento.
Wonderful. Well, I want to be respectful of your time. I know you may have other hearings or things to get to today, so we're going to shuffle our order a little bit. I would just quickly like to introduce Assemblyman Patterson. He represents the Central California area here in the state of California. And Assemblyman, I apologize. I always slightly get the districts mixed up. Is it Assembly District 30?
23.
23. I sometimes get it confused with the congressional district. So Assembly District 23.
Yeah, it's most of the city of Fresno, good chunk of the county of Fresno, wonderful piece of Tulare County as well.
And Assemblyman Patterson, if you have not had the opportunity to meet him, he really is one of the most stalwart champions of the pro-life cause that we have in Sacramento. And I had the privilege of attending my very first political campaign event for him when I was 12 years old and he was running for mayor. I got to go along with my parents to an event he hosted here in the city of Fresno.
You're the one I need to blame for that.
That's right. That's right.
Push me over to the finish line, didn't you?
Yes, that's right. I couldn't vote, but we were cheering loudly. So Assemblyman Patterson has been in Sacramento for several years now, and he consistently is a resolute and faithful advocate for the pro-life cause. And I'm really looking forward to him sharing with all of you what it is like being a legislator there inside the Capitol building. It is, I will say, as compared to some other states in the nation, it's probably not very easy being a pro-life advocate. But I know he appreciates each and every one of you who are on this call, and I hope that you will take what he has to say to heart and you'll be able to use it to be even more effective at contacting your own legislators. Assemblyman, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it's a little lonely up here. A little bit isolated with respect to pro-life. But I am here, I think, and I think those of you watching are in the places of influence and the places of responsibility now because you're needed now more than ever. And because God is placing you there. I'm kind of in the lion's den. I'm kind of in the middle of some of the worst pro-death culture politically that you can find. And there's no place I would rather be. And for me, it boils down to Sharon and my history with our family. And I know Jonathan knows all three of our children are adopted. We had fertility issues for the first decade of our marriage. And we were sort of resigned to, well, I guess we'll just live a bit differently and not have children and all. I think the Lord had a whole lot of different plans in store for us. Two of those children came from pregnancies that were very difficult, a 16-year-old pregnancy and a 37-year-old birth mother pregnancy. The 16-year-old was Jason that brought us Stephanie, his wife, and Jenna and Noah, our grandkids. And the 37-year-old birth mother gave us Lindsay, who married Brandon, who's given us our little Jovi and Leston James. I cannot do anything but advocate and be a voice here because I'm surrounded with the living witnesses of what making a choice of a different kind is all about. And so I just want to encourage you. Political activism is important, yes. Being up in Sacramento, making the case for life is important. Elections are really important. Send me some help. Elections really mattered with respect to the Supreme Court. We're seeing the results of that. But I guess my first and foremost reminder is you have a sphere of influence. There are groups and people around you all the time who need a voice of compassion, of life, and an arm around the shoulder. You never know who you're going to influence to make a choice for life. That happened with Jason. The 16-year-old birth mom was sent to Los Angeles with money and an abortion appointment. Something happened along the way. And she came back home and said, Mom, Dad, I can't do this. They went to counseling and they had the baby, and we have Jason. Somebody, I don't know who, I'll never know, but somebody lived pro-life in the midst of that. The same thing with Lindsay. Went to a doctor up in Lincoln City, Oregon, was confirmed that she was in fact pregnant, and there was going to be a difficult one, 37 years old. And the first thing the doctor said was, well, can we help schedule you for the abortion? And again, a chill, I don't know what it was, but Judy left that doctor's appointment. Lincoln City is a small little town. Walked down a block, walked into another doctor's office, and happened to be a Christian doctor, confirmed the pregnancy, and first thing that he said was, can we help you with an adoption, or can we help you with taking care of that baby? We have contacts and we have ways of helping, and we want to help. These individuals weren't doing politics. They weren't marching in marches, but boy, were they doing pro-life work. In the midst of everyday, ordinary life, there will be people crossing your paths that need to know how much you care before they're going to care about how much you know. Earn the right to be in the conversation because you really do care and you really do love. So I think this is a reminder to be first things first. Yeah, there's political realities here. And I'll just cite a couple of them. One, elections matter. They have huge consequences. This is the fundamental way that we redress our government for grievances, that we have people who represent us. This is a representative republic constitutionally created, and we have to be winning elections. We're making a little bit of progress here on the Assembly and the Senate side. I think we're going to end up with the possibility of maybe a pickup or two. I'm sure hoping so. We'll see. Wonderful friend of mine, Melissa Melendez, went from the Assembly now over to the Senate. Wonderful pro-life woman. I just love her to death, and she lives that pro-life witness boldly. And what a wonderful voice for life that comes from this woman, a Navy veteran and mom. I think that, you learn a lot from people you admire. I admire Margaret Thatcher. Margaret Thatcher said, first you win the argument, and then you win the election. What do you think about that? So the question becomes, how do we phrase the argument? I will tell you how I phrase it. I phrase it in terms of love, care, life, birth, children, and the choice in front of us to give life is one with no regret, as compared to the irrevocable decision to end a human life. And oftentimes that comes with regret, second guessing. I can tell you that I've had interesting experiences in the members' lounge with pro-abortion members here. And because we have a story and because we're willing to, I think, say it in love and yet boldly, we've had conversations with people that I think absolutely affected how they viewed this pro-lifer and what I'm trying to express and why I say what I say to them and on the floor. I also want to suggest something very important: to allow the Spirit of God to prompt you to step into a place that is very uncomfortable. And I think the Spirit of God will prepare you. An example of that was, in fact, I think Jonathan will remember, we had a Roe versus, every year we have a Roe versus Wade celebration. And I rose to say that I want to celebrate a choice of a different kind. I talked about that choice of a different kind. The room went silent. Normally, heavy gavel is used for pro-life speech. It was not. And I was able to say there is a choice of a different kind, without regret, without ending a growing human life. And it's a choice that brings wonderful things. To us, the choice brought us Lindsay. The choice brought us Jason. The choice brought us our grandkids. It brings us birthdays and anniversaries and celebrations and graduations. That's life. The consequence of that kind of choice is joy. The consequence of the other kind of choice, frankly, is regret, oftentimes. And so I have found a place. I want to encourage you. You found a place. Dig deep into what the Lord has placed there for you. I found stretching beyond where you're comfortable, going into territory in which maybe you're not wanted, and saying something with the help of the Spirit of God, I believe, to say it in such a way that is compelling, as convicting, and yet it is gentle. And that's my lesson up here in a very difficult place. But I also wanted to say one thing. You got to win elections. You can march, you can advocate against bills up here, but the bottom line, if California is going to turn away from this culture of death, it's got to turn toward electing people that have, at the very least, a concern over life. And even if they're conflicted over abortion and pro-life, they're at least thinking about it. They have some open mind about, do we really want to do this? And then finally, elections on the national level really matter. And we're seeing the result of that. We now have actually some very good appointees by the Trump administration to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals here. And you know what that Supreme Court and how it has changed. I watched the other night, and I would suggest everybody watch the PBS special on the Supreme Court justice. We lost Scalia, but Justice Thomas is there. Watch that biography, and it will tell a story of God's hand on a person, and that hand led them to places and led them to their destiny. Let God lead you to your destiny. Let his love be your love. Let his voice be your voice. And you will be a compelling witness to life. And I think that's the best way to change hearts and minds. God bless you all for what you do. I can't tell you how delighted I am that we call each other co-workers in this.
Thank you, Assemblyman. We really, really appreciate your time joining us. I'm seeing a lot of very positive comments. I know you probably don't have time to read all the chat, but many, many people in our chat. We have over 200 people with us on the call today. and many of them from across the state, some from your district, some from other parts of the state, and even other parts of the nation and around the world, that are thanking you for your service and letting you know that they are praying for you. So
I appreciate it. I do have the time for you. You know how I feel about you, Jonathan. And our pro-life college student that you just had on before, Tasai, I love her to death. She's wonderful too. I'm here for a while, and if there are questions, I'm glad to try to address them. I'm here to be an encouragement.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I do want to say, if you have a question for Assemblyman Patterson, for Bernadette, or for any of the panelists, I urge you to go and use that Q&A panel. We do have a few questions in there now, and we will be continuing to take them throughout the rest of the presentation. I do want to say very quickly before we move on to our next speaker, Tom McCluskey, just a fun point of connection. Bernadette and her group received a special, I won't say citation, but it was a special resolution from Assemblyman Patterson several years ago, just honoring them for the great work they've done defending free speech, but most importantly, defending the sanctity of life there at Fresno State. So that's just, I was privileged to be there at Fresno State when Assemblyman Patterson presented that to Bernadette and her fellow Students for Life members. And it is just, it's so encouraging to be able to see our government leaders respecting and honoring efforts to defend life. And I've seen some questions in here. People have said at times, what California is so dark, it's so difficult, you know, there's, like Jim said, or excuse me, Assemblyman Patterson said, they're outnumbered there so often up there at the Capitol. But we also know that we are called to be faithful even if we are in small numbers. And I think we don't have time to get into all of it on today's call, but some of those stories that Assemblyman Patterson mentioned, those private conversations behind the scenes, there are hearts and minds that are being changed by what he is doing and by what all of you are doing. So I want to shift a little bit now towards elections and towards the kind of the nuts and bolts, the practicality of some of those national issues. We'll circle back to state politics, but we have with us on the call one of my new friends. I've got to know him a little bit more the last few years and really just admire and respect him so much. His long service for our country and for the cause of life and liberty. Tom McCluskey. Tom is currently with March for Life Action, and he has previous stints with Family Research Council and several other great pro-family, pro-life conservative organizations there in our nation's capital. And Tom, I won't give much more of your bio because I could probably spend another 10 minutes talking about all the regaling people with all your different exploits. But thanks for being with us today. Thanks for your leadership in DC, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Thanks, Jonathan. As far as introductions go, that was one. And I just two things I would like to point out is about the only award first person in the world. So congratulations to Bernadette. And in addition, I also want to give a plug for that PBS documentary, Created Equal, Clarence Thomas in his own words. It is just a fantastic story, and it predates Brett Kavanaugh and what happened to him by well over a decade, except it was the same type of slanderous tactics that we normally see. From those bomb-throwing words, what we try to do here at the March for Life, and the March for Life started in relatively low numbers in 1973, 1974, with about 10 to 20,000 people marching. Nowadays, we have hundreds of thousands every January marching. But what's important, as the Assemblyman pointed out, you can march all you want and everything else, it's the next steps you take. And here at the March for Life, what we try to do is try to humanize the process, the lobbying process, because every single person out there who is marching, who is talking about the life issue, whether you're directly talking to a member of Congress or an assemblyman or anything like that, you are lobbying for life, and you should be applauded for that. But you're also an ambassador for life. So we ask that people approach it in a Christian type manner. And there's a lot you can do even now with lockdowns around the United States, and especially here in the US Capitol. because while you might be locked out of the U.S. Capitol, members of Congress are not. And I always go back to the famous Democrat Will Rogers, who'd like to say that when Congress is in session, it's kind of like when the baby has a hammer. And well, that's what's currently happening right now. The baby has a pretty big hammer. There are different things you can do during this lockdown. You can email your public officials, you can call them. Though I will tell you right now, there aren't a lot of staff working. But what I've found is through social media, you can also have quite the influence. And there's Instagram and all the others. I don't think there's many members on TikTok, but there's members on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter. And what you find on Twitter, at least on the federal level, is a lot of those members handle their own accounts. So if you're from that district, take a selfie of yourself from somewhere in the district and send it to the member. Now, with calling, or when hopefully things open up again, I suggest try to set something up beforehand. You're likely not going to meet with a member of Congress or your elected official. They're very busy. However, one point is that if you do want to meet with them, ask for a picture, especially if you're from a district. With all respect to the Assemblyman, no elected official is going to turn down a picture from a potential voter. So at least then you get about 5 or 10 minutes. When you go there, make sure you only have you're only going to limit it to 2 things. Try to. I know there's a lot you probably want to talk to them about. There's a lot you might be passionate about, but you want to make sure if you're talking to the member or their staff, that you're concise and that they remember you when you're walking away. From that, think about the reputation of the sources you bring to them. You don't want to use sources like tinfoilhat.com or something similar like CNN. You want to make sure that your sources are solid and reliable and factual. And leave something behind for those offices. Repetition. Repetition is key. These people are hearing from hundreds of different people. They're hearing both sides of just about every single issue. So repetition is key. And even if you're repeating what the person right behind you said, say it. It's important that they hear it. Create a story. They like it to be personal. If you have a personal connection, the Assemblyman, I was riveted and I want to now know more about his personal story and about how with his family. The personal story with Bernadette. Those are the things that capture people's attention, especially elected officials. And that allows you to be human. And then be direct and concise when talking to them. I start going off on tangents and everything. You don't want to do that to be an effective lobbyist, and that's what you are. It's not a dirty word. And I just want to go back to the very beginning of treat them, even if you are not a Christian, treat them in a Christian manner. Treat them how you would want to be treated. Even if they disagree with you, they need to hear what you have to say. So if for no other reasons, you can report it back to everybody else in your district. This is what so-and-so thinks about this issue. They understand that you pay their salaries. They don't need to hear you telling them that. So treat them in a Christian way. Even if you aren't Christian, I think you might know what I mean. And talk to them in plainly and create a relationship, not just create a moment in talking with an office. Now for more detail with Greg, and do not feel discouraged. Right now, being in Washington, D.C., you would think you'd be the most discouraged lobbyist in the world, except I'm originally from New York State, which we praise the Lord for California that, okay, who's going to be more liberal today when they're passing legislation? There is always hope. And if sometimes you're not out there to change their minds, you should talk to them and everything. Sometimes you're out there to change their faces. But the first step is marching. The second step is talking with them. And then the third step, you need to decide on your own.
Thank you, Tom.
And to help contact your members, I almost forgot. We want to try to help, and we share this information with our partners in California. If you text Sacramento to 73075, we'll text you right back right away. We do not spam. We will share that list then with Jonathan. So when there are so many different important things popping up that Jonathan and Greg want you to know about, we'll be able to contact you right away. And also on the federal level, with everything going on, to make sure that that we stay a pro-life nation. Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you, Tom. And yeah, I do want to remind people, in case maybe you're joining the webinar today and you might be wondering, well, I'm a little confused. I know about California Family Council and I've heard of the March for Life, but aren't they in Washington, D.C.? Well, yes, they normally are. And if you'd like more information on the March for Life, I strongly encourage you to go to their website. They have an amazing story of their history. But part of the reason that we're hosting this webinar today is that our goal, our plan for this year, is to do a March for Life in Sacramento at the Capitol building. The ironic thing is we had our initial kickoff where we announced we were doing that on Wednesday, March 10th. And the reason that date is indelibly burned into my brain is because that evening, we had just finished doing this amazing event. We had over 50 pro-life leaders from around the state there in the basement of the Capitol in the Eureka Room. Assemblyman Patterson and some of his colleagues, other pro-life legislators from the Assembly and the Senate, spoke to us. And we were all gung-ho and excited to be promoting this event at the Capitol this spring. And then we found out that evening that President Trump gave his address from the Oval Office, that he was suspending travel from Europe, and that weekend was when everything began to completely mushroom regarding coronavirus and COVID-19. So that's changed a little bit of our timing, but we are still planning to do a March for Life, a physical gathering where we are going to paraphrase the First Amendment, petition our government for redress of grievances. And that's why we're so excited to be partnering with Tom and Margaret and Jeannie and the whole team, Mackenzie, the whole team there at March for Life. They're going to be partnering with us and bringing a national style march here to the Capitol in Sacramento. We'll have a lot more details about the actual date of that. We're still waiting on some final permitting approval from the governor, hoping that he's going to revise and change those things. But in the meantime, while we're waiting for that, we wanted to host this event because there's still some very important opportunities for you to be able to engage even this legislative cycle. And that's why I want to kick it over to my colleague, my coworker, Greg Burt. Greg is our Director of Capital Engagement for California Family Council. He has been with us since January 2017. He formerly worked with Assemblywoman Shannon Grove in her office, and before that was State Senator Mimi Walters down in Orange County. And we are really blessed, very grateful to have Greg on staff with us at California Family Council. He lives in the greater Sacramento area and is kind of our eyes and ears inside that Capitol building. And Greg, I'm really excited that you're going to be able to share with our listeners today, our viewers today, how they can continue to make an impact in Sacramento, even in the middle of this shelter-in-place season that we've been living in.
Hold on. There we go. Can you hear me? Great. Hey, well, I appreciate everybody joining on this call. I'm just going to try and give you a crash course in what I've learned over the 10 years. I've worked for members of Congress, 2 state legislators, both in district offices and Capitol offices. And so I just wanted to just give you my insight on how best to have an influence on your legislators and their staff. And I want to focus on 2 main points. The first point, here in California, we got almost 40 million people, got 120 legislators. It can seem overwhelming, like where do you start to have an influence on that many people for the pro-life cause? But here's what I would advise. Focus on your own legislature. Do you know who they are? Do you know who your state assemblyman is and state senator? They represent you and they feel an obligation, and so does their staff. They feel an obligation to represent you. And so legislative offices are overrun with people trying to give them messages, but they give special attention to actual constituents. So take advantage of that, and just focus on having an influence to start with on your own legislator. And the second thing I want to say, as a pro-life activist, a pro-life lobbyist, you not only want to influence the legislator and the staff themselves, but you want to influence other opinion leaders in your community to exert their influence on them as well. So you don't want to act as a lone wolf. You want to work with others. Your job is to educate and motivate and encourage other people to follow your lead, build coalitions with other like-minded leaders as you seek to influence your legislator. So why don't we start off with the first question you need to ask yourself: do you know who your state legislators are? You know, you have a representative in the Senate and in the Assembly. And there's an easy way to find this out. So I'm going to share my screen here. Hopefully you can all see that. This is a website that will be shared in the chat right now. It is findyourrep.legislator.ca.gov. And I put in an address right here, pretty close to where I live, in Elk Grove. And you put your address in there and you hit this locate button. Hopefully you can all see that. And up pops your state assembly member and your state senator. So as you can see, we have Assembly Member Jim Cooper and Senator Richard Pan, both Democrats. And if you want to find out more information about them, which is you should, you need to find out everything they believe. And you need to find out where their offices are. So this is actually my representative here in the Elk Grove area, just south of Sacramento. Here's his website, and down at the bottom, you will see it lists his offices. Did you know that every state legislator not only has an office in the Capitol, they have an office in your community, in the district. So right here on Laguna Springs Drive is the district office. Now, you should also know that specifically on this website, it also lists the staff, right? You need to know the legislator's staff. And it splits it up into the Capitol staff, which you got a chief of staff here, a legislative director, communications director, scheduler, and then you have a district staff with a district director, some field representatives, and a caseworker. Capitol offices focus on legislation. District offices actually focus on relationship building in the community. And so they are the eyes and the ears of the legislator. And so you don't have to come to Sacramento to be a lobbyist. You can lobby right in your own community. Every Friday, every legislator comes back to the district when they're in session on Fridays. And during the fall, they're there all the time. So that's important to keep in mind. All right, and so the next thing you need to know about your legislator is how are they voting on legislation? Do you know how they're voting? Well, that's one thing that our organization specializes in. And so if you want to keep track of that, go to our website at californiafamily.org, as you see right in front of you, and hit the sign up button. This sign up button will give you to a weekly newsletter, and we can keep you up to date on the pro-life legislation or abortion legislation that's coming before the legislature. You need to know about that, right? You need to be educated about that. But we can't communicate to all of you how 120 legislators are voting. So that is your job. And so to find out that, you need to go to this website. This is leginfo.legislature.ca.gov. That's going to be put in your chat right now. And just to give you an idea how to look up legislation, this is a legislative information website. If you know the bill number, now this bill right here is actually a bill that Assemblyman Patterson actually talked about. Every year in January, both the Senate and the Assembly pass a resolution celebrating the Roe versus Wade Supreme Court decision. So if you want to find out how your member voted, you type in the little number, you hit go, and up pops the actual language. And so my representative is Cooper. So right at the beginning here, it shows the members who actually co-authored this bill. And you can see Cooper right there. So Cooper's a co-author. If you want to actually see how the votes are done, you go to this top area right here and you click on the votes tab. And there are the two votes. This first vote was in the Assembly Judiciary Committee. You can see the different members, how they voted no or yay, which is yes. And then up here, you can see the votes as well. So this is how you help keep track. And really, I mean, right here, if you really want to know who the pro-life legislators are and who the pro-life legislators are, you can tell from who's celebrating Roe versus Wade right there. Now back to having an influence on the actual staff of your own legislator. You can actually invite them, invite your district staff, get to know them, get to know their names, invite them to your community events, right? Invite the legislator to community events. If you're dealing with a pro-life office, of course, you're going to be more welcomed in. Democrat offices are going to be a little nervous with pro-life advocates. So make sure that you come across as a safe person, be a respectful person, and but obviously you're actually a person of conviction. And you're also going to try to develop a network of other pro-life leaders in your community. So you're going to activate them when a bill is introduced, okay? And let's say a bill is introduced like SB 24, which we fought. What you can do is you can do a letter writing campaign. Letter writing campaigns are great, especially if you are signing the letter. No mass, I've been in many offices where they get a ton of form letters. Form letters don't have an impact because you have no idea if they're real people signing them. You can do
Greg,
the same thing with...
Didn't you always tell me there was a particular round place that you would put those form letters?
Yeah, you gotta, there is so much mass junk email and letters coming to legislative offices. So if you have names on the list, then it's real people. And that's what your legislator wants to know. Are these people from my community? Are they real? And if they're authentic and they're, then they're gonna pay attention to them, right? Because they know their reelection is dependent upon how they treat their constituents. Organizing a meeting in a legislator's office or with a legislator staff. I know we already talked about this a little bit on the federal level, but bring somebody into those meetings who is actually going to be affected by a bill. Bring in other community leaders and actually bring a fact sheet that you can leave with the legislator to kind of give them all your points. Because just so that they don't forget, right? These folks are super busy, and then you follow up afterwards. Now, honestly, I wouldn't send, I know a lot of the legislative offices encourage sending emails. From my background and from what I see a lot of junk emails enveloping offices, and emails are easy to ignore. So I actually wouldn't advise doing emails. So build relationships with office staff. Focus on getting to know them. And this will magnify your impact, especially the more people you know. And you're bringing in other influencers into the office who are pro-life. Now, the last thing before I end, I want to let you know one thing. I mean, California is a hard state, and this is going to be hard work. I'm not going to gloss that over, but we need to have a faith in a God who does miracles. We need to have faith and pray that God can change hearts, and he can. Listen, history and the Bible is full of small minorities of faithful Christians who are trusting in God for impossible things, but they act trusting that God is going to do the impossible while they do the possible. I just want to leave you with this final verse. Matthew 17:20, and this is what Jesus said. He says, for truly I say to you, if you have faith like a grain of mustard seed, you say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move, and nothing will be impossible for you. The Bible is full of verses like that. Do never believe that California is unchangeable. One of my biggest heroes is William Wilberforce, who took 30 years of faithful service to God in the legislature that turned back slavery. It would seem impossible at the beginning, but his faithful service and trusting in God changed the nation. And I believe that can happen here in California. Thanks.
Perfect, Greg. Thank you so much. And we're seeing a lot of you appreciating that verse in the comments. Greg, can you share that reference one more time?
It's Matthew 17:20.
Gotcha. And one thing, I'm seeing some other comments here coming in. One thing that I appreciate so much about the work that I get to do at California Family Council alongside Greg and our other staff members, and then partnering with so many other great organizations, whether it's the March for Life, whether it's Students for Life of America, Alliance Defending Freedom, all these other great groups, Californians for Life, Real Impact, Pastor Jack Hibbs down in Southern California. The thing that I love so much is that we have a great diversity. You hear a lot about diversity. We have a huge diversity of opinions and people and methods and tactics here in the pro-life movement. And Tom, I can't remember who said this at our March 10th meeting, but I know it really impacted both you and I. It was such a great phrase. When it comes to being pro-life, when it comes to standing for life in the womb and just protecting those who cannot speak for themselves, we are unified, but that doesn't mean we're uniform. Do you remember who said that, Tom? Because I remember both you and I thought that was impressive. I just couldn't remember who to give it credit to without stealing it.
One of the elected officials yet speak, except you had so many that I can't remember which one it was.
It was one. It might have even.
So you can give me the credit.
Yeah, that's right. It was that day. So you can take credit for it everywhere outside of California. So, but that is such a true statement. Everybody who is on this call, the hundreds of people that are on currently, and the thousands of people that will join later and watch the replay of this, we are not all the same. We are going to potentially be from different political parties, different ethnicities, ages, geographies, etc. We're not uniform, but we are all unified in fighting for this cause of life. So we'd like to transition now into a time of Q&A, and we have Assemblyman Patterson was able to jump back in for just a few minutes more with us. Margaret Youngblood is also from the March for Life. Margaret, I'm going to kick things right over to you. I know you had some specific questions for Assemblyman Patterson. So in respect of his time, I want to move him to the front of the queue. If you can ask those questions, and then we'll move to the rest of them as we have time.
Perfect. Can everyone hear me?
Sounds good.
Sweet. Well, one, thank you, everyone. I've been so inspired listening. And Assemblyman Patterson, this is a question that was just occurring to me as you were speaking. So during your remarks, you spoke about the significance of the people that give you a reason to come into Lion's Den and to be in the sphere, be in Sacramento, and you spoke about the importance of relationships. And then you shifted and you talked about us, and you're like, guys, each of you has significance in your relationships. But then you spoke about elections, about how important those are. And I was just hoping that you could kind of bridge those spheres a little bit more with relationship building, because of course we have our spheres and it's so important to be there, but then you have your sphere and we want to influence elections, but through relationships. So I was wondering if you could speak specifically to bridging that, but in a very real way, like the exact real profound way that you were speaking about, and just building that out a little bit more and talking about what actually makes a difference. Because sometimes it can feel very overwhelming as like a little guy who's like, I can do my little part in my own sphere, but the elections are far off, far distant. There's no way I can help. It's not about relationships, it's about numbers.
Well, first of all, I really think that this is about stretching yourself into places where you're uncomfortable. And for a lot of us, and for me, in the beginning of my efforts to be elected, this was stretching myself. This was putting me in places where my reliance on the Lord and on what's deep down in my soul was really important. And so in no way do I want to minimize that your sphere of influence and where the Lord has put you is not a big place, an important place. How many times people are going to cross your path. All I was suggesting was be ready for that signal that it's my time, it's my place. I need to say something. I need to do something here. With respect to relationships, I was caught by the March for Life person from Washington, D.C., talking about get to know that member of the elected body. And here's a tip. All of us have biographies on our websites, and we all do it. And one of the things I do when I'm trying to talk to one of my fellow members here and get serious about things that are important, I look at that biography, and you know what? Oftentimes I find common ground. Some of the things that they might do for a hobby. I happen to like fishing. I'm also a private pilot. I like to fly around. You'd be surprised how many times I've run into people who either boat or fish, or in one way or another, they have some common ground with me. Be able to talk a little bit about that. But with respect to elections, it really is. I mean, think about it as an accumulation of relationships, each adding a gallon into the container. Imagine what happens when 1 million people put a gallon into the container. So you got to win elections by hard work. You got to win elections by contrasting one member to another. And you've got to recognize that this is a battle every single election. And we're looking for a pendulum swing. We're not looking for a revolution. And I think that helps not to get discouraged. And one of the things I love about the March for Life and what you folks do, you have literally changed the discourse. People in this country are starting to think about life and what you're doing in different ways. We're gaining traction with the idea there's a different choice. And that choice for life is without regrets, and all kinds of solutions flow from it. The other is an absolute and irrevocable choice that oftentimes leads to regret. Those are the kind of connections that I was trying to make. I was trying to say, you look at where you are, and the Lord's going to show you an entire field to live every single day pro-life. Look for the opportunity. And then, look, we've got to change hearts and minds. We win elections by winning the argument first. And we've been talking about some of those subtle ways to go and at least make the case and make the argument. As was stated earlier, look, these are human beings. We need to approach them as human beings and created in the image of God. And we need to communicate with them from our heart about the contrast and the difference, and ask them to think seriously about moving in a little different direction for the sake of the biology, for the sake of the real facts and truth in front of us. That this little child can be birthed, can be nurtured, can be loved. And I think these are ways I've found that has helped change hearts and minds. And by the way, I've won elections being overtly pro-life. I was the first Republican mayor of the city of Fresno. It is a blue city. Elected a second time, and then elected up here to the legislature. So it can be done, and we can hold seats that may look safe, but really are surrounded by changing trends. And I think that that's important to recognize those chances and those opportunities as well. I hope that helps.
That does. And this is bouncing from exactly what you're talking about, how like basically making the change where you are and like influencing that, so powerful. And this is a question for both the Assemblyman and other people as well. Tom McCluskey, when he was speaking, he said repetition is key. And that was particularly brought up in regards to talking points. So you want to hear the same message over and over, like don't be afraid of saying the same thing. I was wondering if any of you would like to kind of speak to repetition with the particular like relationships that you're building, and what would be appropriate when you're trying to build a relationship with a legislator. Like, how often should they be contacting you in order to get become familiar, and particularly using social media, because Tom was saying that social media is where they're going, but we know that there's so much on social media. So how can we be repetitive and consistent and build a relationship on social media, but without becoming like a troll or like somebody you don't want to see on your social media feed?
Let me address this, and then I've got to depart. I got to get prepared for a really important committee and hearing meeting at 2 o'clock today. And but what I mean, when you say repetition in social media and the like, this has been something I've tried to develop with my mayoral staff, and we've developed it wonderfully here with the staff that the Lord's given me up here in Sacramento and down in the district. Be different by design. Be different by design. I spent something like 30 years in broadcasting, owning and operating radio stations. I've seen so much of the junk that politicians send to newsrooms, and most of it is just tossed away. It is self-congratulatory, it's patting on the back, and it is so ordinary. Be different by design. Language is really important. We always use the language us, we, ours together, not me, my. We're different by design with respect to graphics. We think graphics need to be compelling, and we need to be editing our social media in such a way that it is crisp, it is compelling, and people want to look at it and engage it. And that's not an easy proposition when you're competing with so many other individuals, folks out there. But I found that if you have a voice, you're comfortable with it, your staff starts to understand what that voice sounds like and even what it might look like, the graphics flow, the manner in which we do things, how we say things is different by design. What I mean by that, different from all the politicians that you've seen over and over again. It is more about us, we together. It's more about the people. It's more about those that don't have a voice up in Sacramento. It's about those that you care about because you're one of them. And it can't be phony. It can't be false. It has to be real. Find your voice, be clear about it, make the presentation graphically appealing, and be different by design. Contrast yourself with all the other lobbying voices that are out there. And you'll find a very special place, I think, that will capture interest. I got to go.
Yeah,
thank you
so much.
Everybody, I appreciate being with you. God love you all, and just keep up the good work.
Thank you, Assemblyman. God bless you.
Bye-bye. You too.
Bernadette, I was hoping that you could actually take that same question and talk about the other end. So he's talking about from his perspective, of course, as like state legislator, but you've effectively done this and you've led people, and particularly you've been a voice for young people. So I was wondering if you could kind of speak to the question maybe at large, but also specifically, like, have you noticed the techniques that help you build relationships as like a young person, somebody using social media, different techniques on college campuses? How did you find your voice, and how did you test out things where it's like, wow, that didn't work as well? Or did you find techniques where like, whoa, not only did that mobilize the people behind me, but it made the people in front of me listen?
Yes, a lot of what I do is ask questions. So whenever I'm having a private conversation with somebody, I always want to get to know their side of the story a little better before I start making my own judgments. A lot of times it's easy for us to put people in a box. And so I like to ask a lot of questions to see what kind of view they have, in this case, specifically about the pro-life movement. And so once I get to know their view a little bit better, and once I get to know them a little bit better, I can tailor our conversation and my own talking points to help them understand my view. And then I can further effectively explain what my view of a certain situation is. And that's very different from talking with the media, because whenever you're talking with the media, they, of course, are going to take sound bites. And so you do want to stick to that repetitive talking point to make sure that your point is taken when the media is putting you on the air. And so in that sense, it's a very, very different conversation. And you want to make sure to have those talking points ready while being able to switch to a more personal, private setting when you're talking with someone one-on-one, which is what most of us do from the day-to-day life anyway.
That's awesome. Does anyone else have any comments about kind of the effectiveness of basically repetition and messaging in order to form those relationships? Greg, did you have anything to say about that on just kind of the California state level in general, or Tom on the national level?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a marketing principle that people, they don't hear things repeated, they don't remember them. Like they have to hear a message 7 times before it starts to stick. So repeating a similar message with a different example, you know, hammering home that abortion, you know, is harmful to women, or people need to hear that over and over. And personal stories are what resonate up here at the Capitol. If you go to any of the hearings, all the legislators bring in a very emotional witness that talks about how this particular bill is going to affect them personally. And so we have great stories. And so we need to let people hear those stories, because many times staff and legislators are only hearing one side. When I first came up to the Capitol, even the media couldn't find any pro-life voices to speak when Planned Parenthood threw a big rally on the legislative lawn. Why is that? Why is it so hard to find somebody who the media can talk to? And so we've got to get out there, get our voices out there, and be willing to be public about it.
And I flip it that, and Greg and I have talked about this, that we both worked for elected officials, and we work currently alongside elected officials. Nothing is worse than when something bad happens and the assemblyman or the congressman says, I never heard anything about it. Why didn't my constituents say anything about it? And sometimes the constituents did, just not enough did. So that's why, that was kind of my point with repetition. I agree with everything the assemblyman said about being unique and telling your personal story. But don't worry, if the message is, like on the federal level, fetal tissue is bad, it should not be used. Human fetal experimentation should not be used to try to find a vaccine, say for COVID-19, because that would just be ending lives on top of ending lives. That's something that members of Congress and elected officials have to hear over and over and over again. And maybe you have a personal story to attach to it.
I also wanted to add to what Greg was saying earlier about hearing a message 7 times. Sometimes I think that the general public thinks that maybe something like SB 24, the campus abortion bill, is just a fluke and that it's the only extremist piece of legislation that's out there. So we can't just talk about the campus abortion bill and then end it after that and only focus on that. We have to look at all these other pieces of legislation. Last year, they were trying to put Planned Parenthood's phone number on the back of ID cards in AB 624. Luckily, that was vetoed because that was kind of an obvious breach of our constitutional rights. 13-year-olds can get an abortion without the parents' knowledge. Abortion is legal through all 9 months of pregnancy. We need to remind the public that this is happening all the time, not just in California, but across the nation, and it's continuously growing. So we need to not only stop the legislature with what they're doing now, but we need to start introducing that pro-life concept in people's minds through our conversations with the media and through our conversations, our private conversations.
Beautifully said. So I'm going to toss to, we're kind of running to the last 15 minutes here. So let's just talk about some other questions that are kind of a bit different. One, this is from somebody in the chat box. What can one do to influence others when their assemblywoman and state senator are already pro-life, but outside their own districts? Is there anything you can do basically outside your district?
Yeah, I mean, if you have a very staunch pro-life representative, that's great. Doesn't mean you shouldn't reach out to them, make sure that they have full support within your own district. You really want to have every member to be a passionate advocate at the Capitol. So just because they vote pro-life doesn't mean they're a pro-life leader at the Capitol. So you want to encourage them to be speaking up in hearings and to putting out press releases and to, you know, speaking passionately about the value of human life. So now outside the district, well, now you can, once you have your own district organized, now you can move outside to and just think about the relationships you have. Join up with other groups that are outside your group. I mean, we work with all kinds of organizations that have pro-life organizations, and so start pairing up with them. Get on their email list. See how you can help them. There are always more additional things you could do, and if you got great state legislators, there's also school board members and city council members who eventually move up into those positions. There's always room to do in pro-life advocacy in your own city. Making sure even the pastors and your other religious leaders in your community are advocating for the pro-life message, because we become quiet, then the next generation is raised up taught in school that abortion is okay, and then you lose the next generation. So there's always work to do.
Yeah, that's tricky. And then just thank you, Greg. To speak more about like different methods of communication, this is another question from the chat from Deborah Thompson. Is it as effective to go to the representative's website to leave a comment instead of writing letters? So maybe behind that too is just the idea like, yeah, there's different methods of communication. Are there maybe also ones that you shouldn't do because they just don't get anywhere?
Well, I'm assuming this, I guess I'll take that one. If when you go to the legislator's website, typically they have you fill out a contact form. You can send it in message and it goes into their email system. That is probably, I mean, it's fine, but it's also easy for that message to get lost. Legislators are getting inundated every day with hundreds of messages. And when staffers get overwhelmed, they just let them pile up and they don't even get to them. I've seen that happen in many legislative offices. The better way not to be ignored is to make a phone call. You got to raise yourself up above the influx of junk that legislative offices are giving. So calling people up, getting to know their name, personal visits are far better than emails.
Greg, if I could tie into that, one of the things that I think we've seen so effective over the last few years, and I'm sure Tom could probably speak to this in the federal lobbying efforts as well, is that if it's easy, probably everybody is doing it. And if everybody is doing it, then it's probably getting ignored.
That's right.
What you have to be willing to do, and this is something like Bernadette said, some of the things she shared in her presentation, you have to be willing to do the harder thing. It is harder to drive all the way up to Sacramento, either as a day trip or even spending the night. It's harder to go around to a dozen or more legislators' offices. But those are all things that help get results. We would obviously love to have you join us at the Capitol in Sacramento, but the great thing, like you said, Greg, I'm always amazed at how few people actually go to their local district offices. I think a lot of times people think it either has to be all or nothing. Well, either I'll just send an email or I have to go to the Capitol and, speak in opposition to the bill. There's a lot in between those two things that you can do. And I think a lot of times, I know Bernadette has gone and met with legislators in their own home offices, and you talk about doing stuff outside the district. Sometimes it's helpful for you to be able to go, and if you get trained on this, you can go and meet with some of your colleagues in other parts of the state. Maybe there's a district that is only not a 3-hour drive away, but maybe it's a 20-minute drive away. You can go with some friends. Obviously tell the truth, tell them that you're from a neighboring district, but find some friends from that district, from your local district, go with them, because there can be strength in numbers. And then they can turn right around and help you. They can go with you to a district that's right nearby as well.
Awesome. Thanks for adding in there, Jonathan. That's great. So we have time for one more question, and it's to kind of speak directly to what you guys have all been speaking about. You're like, okay, these are ways to communicate, to reach your lobbyists. I was wondering if we can start with Bernadette and then have other people chime in. But what in your experience from working with different people or even being a first-time lobbyist yourself, what do you think is the most common fear or the thing that's holding people back? Like what stops them from taking that step? And so can you maybe like speak to what that is and also how you encourage people and say like, don't be afraid. This is the truth about it. You can do this. How do you encourage people there?
My own personal fear was not being able to answer a question in full that a legislator or a legislative staffer might have for me. And that's going to happen whether you have no experience or a lot of experience. There might just be some questions that you may not be able to answer the way you want to. And if you think back to your high school days, if a bully walked up to you and they said something to you and you just didn't have a good response and then you walk away and then you think of the perfect response after that, that's going to happen wherever you are. It doesn't matter what conversations you're having with anybody. And it could be a friendly pro-life staffer, or it could be someone who is more pro-abortion. And so what I always hope to do is make sure that I am fully prepared, that I know my talking points as well as possible, and that I am praying before every single one of those office visits. My group and I would go and stand outside the door and just say a quick prayer before we knock on the door and step in and make sure that we have the Lord's guidance. Because even if you say something that might not be exactly the way you wanted it to sound, maybe that's what that staffer needed to hear. So I always want to encourage you to go ahead and give it a try, because of course the first few times are going to be a little bit rocky, and it definitely was for us. Our first lobby day was very rocky, but after we got into the swing of things, by our 7th, 8th lobby day, we were a lot more familiar with the process and felt a lot more confident in what we were doing.
Practice makes perfect.
Yeah, I guess also just be aware, staff, it's not unusual. They do this all day long. They're eager to hear from constituents. And so don't feel that it's an imposition. Don't feel you have to be professional. Just admit, be honest, be sincere, tell your own story and why you're there, and you'll be compelling. And the more you do it, the more comfortable you'll get. You'll realize that these staffers are people too. They got families and moms and dads, and they're there because they want to make a difference. Legislators are people. Don't be intimidated by them, and treat them kindly, and they will treat you respectfully back for the most part. So
if they don't hear from you, they're hearing about you from when the Planned Parenthood lobbyists come in, and it's not a pretty picture. Show them the truth.
Absolutely.
Truth about yourself and the truth about the issue.
That's right. They are lied a lot about pro-lifers. I mean, abortion survives on deception and lies. And so they've heard a lot of it. So personally meeting someone and hearing why you're pro-life personally, and hearing a personal story, that means a huge, those things they remember, and just pray that they would dream and think about what you've said long after you leave.
And definitely focus on what Tom said about being the people that you can express your own message. Don't let Planned Parenthood tell your message for you, because it's not going to be the truth. And so a lot of times when we're having conversations on campus, in the community, when we're sidewalk counseling, we would have people tell us, wow, I've never had a conversation with a pro-lifer before. I didn't know that you guys were just nice, usual people. So we need to be able to give off that kind of view and make sure that we are humanized in their view. Because if they're really just watching CNN and Planned Parenthood's talk shows, then we're never going to be able to express our side of the story.
Yeah, they like to describe us as all old white bearded males. And I think we've proven today that we're not.
Some of us don't have beards.
Some of us are young white bearded males, so.
Great.
all kidding aside, it has been such a pleasure to be with all of you on the call today. I want to again thank, she's been hiding behind the March for Life logo, but Mackenzie Rogers has been helping run the stream from the background. Thank you, Mackenzie. We really appreciate you. Tom McCluskey, thank you for your leadership. I'm sorry that we will not get to see you June 23rd in person, but we are looking forward to having the March for Life here in Sacramento soon. Appreciate you and all of your efforts there in DC. Margaret, likewise, it's been an honor to get to work with you, and I hope that everybody will sign up for the March for Life text messages. If you text Sacramento to 73075, you can get great updates from Margaret and Tom, Mackenzie, Jeannie Mancini, the whole March for Life team. And I also want to thank our other panelist, Bernadette Tacey. Bernadette, I know you have a lot going on as you're finishing out this work year as a speech language pathologist. This isn't, I should clarify, this isn't Bernadette's day job. She has a normal job. She's just doing this out of the goodness of her heart, joining us and sharing her personal story and the testimony of how you can be pro-life. So thank you, Bernadette, for your sacrifice and for your leadership. And Greg, of course, thank you for your leadership there alongside the team we have at California Family Council. Thank you for always being the eyes and ears for the organization there inside the building. Folks, we want to again remind you, you can find out more about both of our organizations. CaliforniaFamily.org is our website for California Family Council, and marchforlife.org, or is it .com? I think, oh, you guys are muted now.
I believe it's both.
I think it's both. Okay, perfect. I encourage you, go to those websites, sign up, find out more, and I really encourage you to stay involved as we're preparing for our face-to-face March for Life, our California March for Life. If you sign up on the text messages, and if you sign up on our website, californiafamily.org, for emails, you will be the first to find out when that march is happening. And we hope you will all join us in Sacramento when that happens. But in the meantime, go back to your own communities, stand up for life, stand up both with your friends, your neighbors, your church members, and very importantly, with your elected officials. God bless everybody. Appreciate you being here. We'll talk to you again soon.